For every hour that you shift, it takes you 24 hours to reacclimatize.
On this week's episode, we have Phil Learney and we discuss all things human optimization.
People work out for about 4% of their lives. Sleep and function, another 96. So essentially the impact we have is significantly more than sports performance. Well-being goes well beyond the gym. People are pushing themselves physically harder than ever before. Use zinc picolinate, magnesium glycinate. Most brands don't, they use oxide because it's cheaper. But energy drink manufacturers aren't going to tell you this. What is the added value? What are you delivering to these clients that is in excess of what the next person is? I had a waiting list a mile long. I had clients there that waited for 5 years to get a slot with me rather than train with anybody else. I like to dig very deep into any topic that we're talking about. Am I able to wake up effectively and efficiently in the morning? Hitting the snooze button is a sign something's wrong, right?
What are the 3 biggest mistakes that you've made?
Obviously, this is subjective, right? But for me,
Phil Learney, welcome to the Fitness Marketing Agency podcast. First question, I'm a busy business owner, stressed out, young family, trying to manage sleep, trying to juggle staff, business. How do I optimize myself to perform at a higher level?
Okay. First thing is prioritize. Obviously, when we look at exercise, which is, the world we come from, is exercise has always been about prioritizing a time or a slot or something, period in your day which you're going to do activity. Then beyond that, you've then got to look at the non-negotiables, which is the way I always like to put it, is managing your sleep and your wake cycle. So a lot of the work we do now is about managing sleep, but ultimately, if you've got a sleep problem, you've also got a wake problem. People forget about that fact. It's a bit like back in the day, everybody used to talk about bedrooms and it should be this dark environment like a bat cave, blah, blah, blah. But nobody really ever talked about managing light at the other end of the spectrum. So it's getting the basics right. It's the understanding that if you don't get enough sleep, you don't recover, you don't consolidate memories, you don't, your risk of injury goes up if you're a professional athlete, your cognition goes down, your overall physical function goes down. So therefore then that starts to impact our metabolic health, starts to impact our heart health, starts to impact our overall mental health, because again, it's a bit like that. I would say it's a bit like the two voices on each shoulder. The one that's negative starts to get a bit louder because, you're tired all the time, you're chasing your tail, you're a bit unorganized, you don't. So a lot of it is down to prioritizing, is understanding that sleep has to be a priority. It's a base requisite of human function. Exercise has to be a base. It has to be there. We're designed to move. We're designed to do activity. We're not designed to sit behind a desk all day. So we've kind of looked after that with the industry, and obviously where I came from was about movement. It was, it was my job to get people to move efficiently, to move in a way that they could adapt or become better, become stronger, become faster, become leaner, whatever it might be. So getting those fundamentals right, we can then recover better. We get the sleep right, we recover better. Our body composition improves, because again, our metabolic health improves, cognition, output, we're more successful in life, we make more money, we have better relationships, and all of those tie in. So really as a coach and as somebody who's been in that space, if you get all those fundamentals right, people just have a good life. They succeed, they have healthy home relationships, and it always sounds a little bit almost too much, right? You're saying if you get better sleep, you're going to improve your relationships. People are like, yeah, whatever. But we look at the science, and that's the case. So it's about priorities. It's about getting the basics right and executing those basics, right? We talk about business and we talk about all these things. It fundamentally comes down to do what you said you were going to do.
We'll come back to optimization, sleep, and everything like that. What year did you start in the fitness industry, and how did your career progress? And then let's fast forward to what you do right now.
What year will be tricky. I'd have to sit and calculate that. But I've been in the industry now just shy of 26 years. So I was, I had a part-time role that involved being in the fitness world. I then did my basic fitness instructor course, which back then was essentially the same as it is now, which is scary. Then I did my PT. I went to university, did sport and exercise science, and have been in the industry in different guises all the way through that process. So I've been in the industry a long time, and throughout that time, it was kind of it was enlightening as you go along, because obviously the first reason you get into it is because you want to train people. You want to keep them fit. You want to do whatever you need to do. But yeah, it was 26 years ago.
And let's progress to right now. What does your role entail?
So I launched the Advanced Coaching Academy. We'll be nearly 10 years old now. The reason for that is there was a disparity in education in the fitness world, as far as I was concerned. And to be honest, I still believe there is. Because people were doing a level 3, a very base qualification. That qualification hasn't really moved, hasn't changed, hasn't adapted with the times. You still learn the same thing. If anything, it's actually become a shorter qualification. You can actually spend less time and it doesn't require as much capital to do it. And I wanted to build something that was going to progress people beyond that point, to teach them about business, which they were never taught. How do you operate and run a business on a base fundamental level? How do you expand your nutritional knowledge so you can actually advise your clients better? You can collaborate with nutritionists, dietitians at the right and relevant time. And also the coaching. It was how do we move people into slightly more complex coaching programs, understanding a little bit more about, what's a novelty versus what's a practical way of training somebody, and just differentiating between those. One of the things we did with nutrition was look at all the commercial diets available and understanding the pros and the cons of each one of them, rather than dismissing them and going, that's terrible. We were like, well, people have been doing these and succeeding at them for a long time. So we need to understand, why did they succeed, but also why did they fail? So we'd break all those down. And that was the purpose behind the academy. And then that's kind of migrated to some degree, in that, I've done a lot of mentoring, I do a lot of advisory work and things like that. Now, I stepped away from coaching. That'll be 6 years ago nearly now. I finished my career in Mayfair. My clientele at that time were all high net worth, ultra high net worth clients, actors, actresses, professional sports people. So I was dealing with a very unique demographic. And part of that was, again, looking at sleep cycles, weight cycles. They all had the same problems. They were the overuse and abuse of stimulants, to keep them awake, because they were high performers, right? So their idea was sleep, compromise, which is what trainers and coaches do. I remember back in the day, I used to survive off 5 hours sleep, and I'd kid myself I was just one of those people that could do it. And then what would happen is my mental health would suffer, my physical health would suffer. It was like this uphill battle all the time. And I was like, well, hold on, something's not right here. So I started to address that better. I started to use less stimulants. I was the caffeine and pre-workout king at one point. If anybody wanted to know the best pre-workout, they came to me and asked, because, I loved them, because I was reliant on them. And then because I was relying on them, fortunately for me, I didn't really go down that route. But what you do because when you're in that health space, there's this taboo around consuming alcohol. I grew up in a pub as well, which I think when you've kind of witnessed it and seen the effects of it and the positives and the negatives, I think you have a different outlook on it. So for me, it was always, look, I struggle to sleep. I don't sleep very well. And the typical go-to would be a depressant. So people overstimulate with typically caffeine, and then they use depressants. Now, some of the clients I dealt with they'd gone way beyond caffeine. Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out where, which were readily available in certain areas of culture and society, and depending on where they worked. And it was also just a done thing. You look at like The Wolf of Wall Street. That was just how it was. That was a done thing. And people look at it as a movie and it's this fictional thing. But I've dealt with so many clients, and, I spoke, we did a big presentation in London, and there was a lady there who actually, there was kind of a dropout area for questions at the end, and she'd actually typed it on her phone so she didn't have to say it in front of everybody. And she just wrote, I lived The Wolf of Wall Street for about 10 years, and she has chronic sleep problems. She has all this. So she was like, in desperation, came and asked, and obviously she came to the seminar because it was about sleep and wake cycles. So I ended up dealing with a lot of people with the same problems. And then I wanted to present a solution to those problems. And my co-founder was the ex-founder and owner of PhD Nutrition. And I did a lot of consultancy work for them back in the day when they first started. I was their strength and conditioning expert. I did a lot of conferences and things like this for them. So I'd talk about nutrition and blah, blah, blah. And we always said we'd do some work together. We just assumed back then that it'd be sports nutrition, because sports nutrition at the time was super exciting. I did a degree in sport and exercise science. I did my dissertation on creatine. There was HMB. There was all these different things and these compounds coming through that could benefit athletes, sodium bicarb, blah, blah, blah. And now we get to today, nothing's really moved. There's a few new exciting areas that athletes are potentially looking at. But for the most part, we were going to repackage something that's been done a million times over. And that didn't excite me. And I was like, look, there's a real world problem here that we can look at and address, which was the sleep work cycle. So it goes back to, on a scientific level, it's circadian biology. And that's what I'm doing now predominantly. I still have the academy. We still educate coaches. We still do live events. We have an asset arm to the academy. So we produce material for coaches, welcome packs, guides to MyFitnessPal, various other bits and pieces. And we do recipe books on a monthly basis and just assets that can help them deliver a better service to their clients. We do full customization. We've got a graphics design team so we can do branding and all those things as well, which is a big part of the business as well. But for me, a lot of my attention now is on the new business, Human 24. We are all about the sleep work cycle. So we're looking very much at crossing over into the industry. We're looking at, the health and fitness world, which has evolved massively. People are now looking at wellness with this completely different, outlook. Wellness once upon a time used to be not sick. Wellness was about don't be sick. You can't be sick. Whereas now people are going, well, wellness is now, it's much more than this. It's am I able to wake up effectively and efficiently in the morning? Hitting the snooze button is a sign something's wrong, right? Going to bed at night and having a stick on Netflix for 2 hours is a sign something's not right. But this is the norm for a lot of people. I always say school teachers. School teachers are a great example because I always remember, people that talk about teacher's breath, right? And what are you referring to? You're referring to coffee breath, right? You're referring to somebody who has an over-reliance on coffee throughout the course of the day. And teaching's stressful, right? It's difficult. It's challenging. Anyone with young kids will know that dealing with a couple of young kids is challenging. Never mind 30 or 40. And, it's mentally and physically challenging. So the culture is you have these little breaks, and in the little breaks you get your mug and you fill it up with coffee. That's the culture. So you fall into it, whether you were somebody who had 1 cup of coffee in the morning to start with, by the time you get into your teaching career, it's now 3 or 4 cups. So people are consuming coffee later on in the day, then they get home and they're like, oh, it's been a long day, blah, 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 and they reach for the bottle of wine. They have a couple of bottles of wine or glasses of wine, and that acts as a depressant. So that essentially is negating the effect of the stimulants to try and get you to sleep. The problem is alcohol is also affecting your sleep quality. So then you're just in this vicious cycle. You're just in this hamster wheel. So our goal as a brand is to get people out of this hamster wheel. And for us, it's an extension of my experience with the type of clients that I dealt with. And what was the biggest influence I could have on these clients? And I always thought it was training. It was making them leaner, making them fitter, making them feel better about themselves, making them physically stronger, whatever their goal might have been. But then I was like, well, hold on, no. The life-changing stuff occurs outside of that. The life-changing stuff is when they feel more positive about themselves. Their mental health is better, their physical health is better, their overall outlook on life is much better, and also their performance is up. We do work with one of the big social media brands, and that was an easy conversation. I went in, I presented, I explained to them what we do in the sleep workspace, and I said, look, just hydration alone. So if you've got 4,000 employees in this building, I said, and I can guarantee you there's a high percentage of them that are dehydrated most of the day. Now, if I can hydrate every single person in this building significantly more than they are before, I'm going to increase cognitive and physical output by about 5 to 10% across the board. You look at the net effect of that, 4,000 employees performing better. You look at the effect that has on your business, on your top line, on your numbers, blah, blah, blah. They were like, oh my God, where do we sign up? And we're now supplying that group with product, what we do. And they're giving it to their employees and going, here, take this, So it was finding this solution to a real world problem. But that solution wasn't just supplements and it wasn't just product, it was education. Is educating people about caffeine management, educating people about light management, educating people about, stress management, all the things that are now hugely topical. People talk about things like, you shouldn't consume caffeine in the first 60 to 90 minutes, but nobody explains why. We explain why. We tell you the science, we explain the science, we facilitate your understanding. And like the alcohol thing, 4 units of alcohol will affect your sleep quality by 40%. Now, if you wear a Whoop or an Oura or an Apple Watch, you see that happen. It's not, you're an outlier or whatever. It's everybody. So what happens there is that you're just educating someone to a point where they can make a rational decision. Am I going to have 2 glasses of wine at night? what actual benefit is that to me? It costs me money, makes me feel a little hazy, helps me sleep a little bit better, but ultimately it's a sticking plaster for a bigger problem. So could that be down to light management? Could it be down to caffeine management? Could it be down to my rituals that I go through before getting into bed? Is it habitual for me just to put the TV on and put something that, again, winds me up? Cortisol levels should drop as we go to bed if I got something that's spiking cortisol, like looking at your emails. So we hear these things all the time. People say, don't look at your emails or your phone for the first 60 to 90 minutes of the day. Why? Because it influences cortisol, creates an emotional response. Why shouldn't you do it before bed? Because it creates an emotional response. It influences cortisol. It increases stress hormones. You do that, it impacts your sleep quality. And people don't think about this, And we have these little things like people putting sprinklings of salt in the water, but nobody explains why. So we dot the I's, we cross the T's. And then when we do that, we're like, right, we can now add, a select few ingredients into your daily nutritional regime that will enhance each one of these outputs. We can improve cognition. We can improve your alertness levels. We can improve the way you sleep, the quality of your sleep. So, for example, sleep. Well, sleep. I'm sure we'll probably get into, but sleep was kind of this reverse engineering of what are the problems we've got and how do we find solutions for those problems.
I'd love to go back to the gym floor. What rates were you charging back then? And the more important question, how did you get these high achievers, high flyers to respect you, listen to you, and then implement the stuff that they needed to do outside of the sessions that you were coaching them in?
So when I first came to London, I was headhunted by a business, and they wanted me to be a part of building a set of gyms. They were building some gyms called concept clubs, they were called. And they were going to be insane. I mean, I don't think there's a gym now that delivers a service akin to them. Again, we talked about, before we got on the podcast, Kicks in Chelsea. So it's this boutique, it's beautiful. You've got somebody opens the door when you walk in. You've got almost like a concierge service. And this was the concept. And they ran out of money. They didn't get it off the ground. It was, they had the sites ready to go and everything there, but obviously it was a huge budget and it never happened. So then I got an interview at Third Space in Soho, which at the time was the place to work. It was like, if you were, the pinnacle of fitness, coach in the London area, Third Space was the place to work, but it had this really stringent sort of interview process. But one of the chaps that was going to be our general manager knew my background. He knew who I'd coached and what I'd done beforehand. Elsewhere I'd worked up in Leeds and worked abroad for a little bit. And he went to the manager of Third Space at the time and said, look, Phil's looking for a job because what we're doing's fallen by the wayside. They literally showed me around and offered me a position. So I started the next day. 3 weeks later, I've got a waiting list. And at the time, they had a flat rate that they charged. So I did that for a few years, but then that flat rate never moved. So I started to get a little bit disgruntled because the way that the setup was, there was so many clients coming through the door, or potential PT clients or PT inquiries coming through the door, that if you were prepared to work longer hours, you had the clients, they'd give you them. So there was never any client acquisition. You didn't have to really acquire clients. But what I did is I went in all guns blazing within 3 weeks, and it wasn't people gave me clients. I started with a couple, and then I got a referral, another referral, another referral, and people were coming through, from all angles. And all of my clients were quite, I think by default, they were quite wealthy. They were quite well-to-do. There was, when I moved, which I'll get onto in a second, but when I moved, I only lost one client. And that was somebody who genuinely couldn't afford my new rates. So it got to a point where I approached them and I said, look, I need to be able to charge more, or you need to map out a career progression for me. Because at this point, what's happening is my fees are staying the same. And this we see all the time in the fitness industry, right? My fees stay the same. Every year, cost of living goes up significantly. And people are more aware of this now than ever, right? Post-Brexit. Everybody's more aware of this than ever. But we weren't even going up by inflationary rates. So my quality of life on a year-by-year basis was declining. And the only solution I had to it was to do more work. Now, I'm not shy of work, but I'm also aware that the more PT sessions I did, the lower the quality got. And part of my reputation was the quality of delivery and sessions and the fact that I was attentive to my clients the entire time. You can't do, because people forget about this in the fitness industry, that if you go and do a 9-to-5 job, wherever it might be, you're not working 8 hours. You know, what you're doing is you're in work for 8 hours. You may be only working, you know, you'll have moments where you nip off to the bathroom, you know, you have extended bathroom breaks, which everybody does. You know, you jump on your social media for a little bit in between calls or whatever you're doing or your emails. As a coach, if I've got a client and they've paid for an hour of my time, they get an hour of me. Full intensity, right? Full concentration, full focus, blah, blah, blah. You can't do that for 8 hours a day. We even know, science tells us that human beings can't focus for that duration of time. So I know that if you're doing 8 clients a day or 9 clients a day, the last few clients of your day are getting a poor service. So I was like, right, I can't afford for that to happen, because ultimately if I'm going to drive my rates up, which was always the goal, it was always I want to charge more for a better service. So if I keep delivering a better service, I've got grounds to charge more. But they never let me do it. So I sat down with the owner who intimidated the hell out of everybody, but it was this language. You just had to talk in their language. I took an Excel spreadsheet. I said, look, this is where we're at. And I ended up actually, prior to that, I got everybody in the place a raise. Because I took, and I said, look, the model, there's no incentive for people to do more sessions. And there's certain people who aren't doing. And my cap was always 25 sessions a week. You know, I'd never do any more than that, because I knew that after that point, things would start to decline. So I always had opportunities to make more money, but it meant working more hours with a poorer service, which meant that the longevity of what I could do as a coach and the potential of driving my career based off a service model was nigh on impossible. You know, it's a bit like a high-end hotel opening, but not employing enough staff. So therefore, in the first couple of years, the service level isn't great. So therefore, people don't go back and stay, right? You know, you go back to a restaurant largely because of the food quality, yes, but everybody can nail food quality. What they can't nail is service. You know, you go to a high-end hotel, I want service. You know, I want to, you know, head back to my room the next day with fresh bed linen. I want to have my toilet roll folded slightly. You know, just trivial little things, but they all stack up, right? So it was these little details, you know, and I would have my clients talking to other clients in the change rooms, and it would be, my coach doesn't do that. My coach doesn't do that either. My coach doesn't do that. So I was doing everything. You know, if they were eating out, I was phoning the restaurant, finding out what was on the menu, you know, which is a much easier job now because everybody lists calories. But back then it was like I had to sit down and calculate and tell them what the best options were. If they were traveling, I used to find out where they were traveling to, whether they had a gym. If they had a gym, I'd phone up the hotel, find out what equipment was. And it got met so many times with this bizarre response. But like, can you at least take a picture of the gym for me? They were like, what? I said, I want a picture of the gym and I want to know what equipment's in there. So therefore I can plan sessions for my client to do when they're there. And at certain times I'd travel with my clients, other times I wouldn't. Sometimes I'd find a coach for them in the local area. So I'd do my research, do my homework, blah, blah, blah. I'd manage nutrition. So there was, at the time, I had 2 clients that I employed chefs for. They'd come in on a Monday and Thursday and prep all their meals. At the time, meal prep wasn't a thing. There wasn't anybody really doing it. So I facilitated that. And then towards the latter end of my career, there was businesses started to do that. But I facilitated all that. I had a couple of actors I dealt with. And I used to make their food for them. You know, so it was, but they paid the same as everybody else. So it was, how do I drive this, and how do I continue to? And they put a lockdown on it. Essentially, they said, we're not going to charge anymore. I said, but because what we don't want to do is create this void where there's different, you know, trainers who are better than others. I said, but I am better, you know, and it wasn't an arrogant thing. I was, you know, technically, you look at my qualifications, you look at my experience, I was better. I had a waiting list a mile long. I had clients there that waited for 5 years to get a slot with me rather than train with anybody else. So they chose not to have PT because they couldn't have it with me. You know, it was mad. So then I was about to move to the US. I got featured in a timeout feature with Nick Mitchell from Ultimate Performance. And I'd never met him before. So we met kind of through that. We had a little meeting. He said, I'm opening a place in Mayfair. Do you want to come as Director of Education for Ultimate Performance? So you come as Director of Education. You facilitate all the internal education for all the coaches. And you can charge whatever you want. I was like, okay. So that shifted my move to the US, which I didn't really want to do, but it was the only career progression I could see, which was going to the US and working with athletes and blah, 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 which was kind of my background. And I moved to UP at the time, doubled my prices overnight. Every single client came with me. Now, I didn't poach them, just to make sure that's in there. Because there was this thing in the contract where you can't take your clients with you. You can't poach them. There was no interaction. There was no emails. There was no nothing. All my clients chose to come and train with me. So it was always safe from that perspective. And it was this thing, one of the last things the owner said to me, he said, what are you going to charge? And I told him, I said, I'm going to charge £130 an hour. I was £65 an hour at the time. I said £130 an hour at the time. And he goes, and the last thing he said to me, I remember it, and he just looked at me and he had this funny look about him and he said, well, if it all goes wrong, he goes, there's always a job here for you. As if to say, that's not going to work. So they actually invited me to the Christmas party about a month later. He said, oh, how are you getting on? I goes, I got a waiting list at £130 an hour. And that's when I lost that one client. And then progressively over the next probably 18 months, I went up to 225 plus VAT per hour, which I think at the time I was the highest charge. There was one guy in Mayfair he was in all the papers, and what was he called? Something Le Physique. I think he was a French guy, but he was charging like £1,000 an hour, and he made it into all the papers because of it. He got like a double page spread in the Times and blah, blah, blah. But I think it was a bit of I don't know whether he still exists or whether it was a thing that actually happened, but it's this thing of cost, right? Is that people perceive quality based on cost a lot of the time. It's like the conversation I have with a lot of coaches is increase prices. If you're a good coach and you're delivering a great service, increase your prices. And they're like, yeah, but then my clients will leave. I said, not if you're delivering a great service and you're a good coach. They won't. Because, the next person down the road is going to take your slot. And this happens so many times. And it's almost, coaches really struggle with this understanding of how good they actually are. However, on the other end of the spectrum, you've also got coaches who are delusional about how good they are, who will jack up the prices and ultimately then lose all their clients and lose their business. So there's a time and a place, but you've got to have this service. And I was confident at that time I had that service. Double my prices, didn't just increase them, doubled them. Because obviously my clients were fully aware that for 5 years, I hadn't increased my prices, but I wasn't in charge of that. I wasn't able to. And they're not stupid, they're business people. It's an adult conversation. I'm like, I haven't increased my prices, and I didn't have to rationalise it with any of them. I just said, I'm moving it to this. And they all came apart from one. And he actually emailed me and said, I just genuinely can't afford it. And he was actually one of the senior shoe designers for Jimmy Choo. And he was probably one of the only clients, a great guy, but one of the only clients I had that didn't own his own business, and then by default, and that's what happens, right? I outpriced that one person, and I was quite disappointed to lose because he was an awesome client, worked really hard, but he said, look, I can't afford that. And it wasn't I'm really annoyed at you. It was, it was this respectful exchange of, okay, cool. And we did a bit of online stuff afterwards, and I just gave him some programs to do and blah, blah, blah. But I was 225 plus VAT per hour.
What would you say to the coach right now that has a number of clients, but they're not following instructions? They're not doing the stuff outside of the gym. How can they pull that client in line to get that client better results?
It's almost people having respect for your services and respect for your knowledge and respect for... I spent a lot of time, and you'll probably get this from the podcast, is that I like to dig very deep into any topic that we're talking about. And this was the case with my clients. So I had my clients that wanted to know the whys and the hows. So I would tell them the whys and the hows. Then I had the clients who didn't care. And it was determining and understanding, how do I communicate? And communication is like one of the worst skills that most coaches have. They're terrible at communicating. They're terrible at conversing with people. You stick them in a social event and say network, they sit in the corner and they're very introverted. And I was always very good at communication on a one-to-one basis. I grew up and I always attribute this a little bit to growing up in a pub. I grew up in a pub and watched my dad speak to complete strangers on a daily basis. We were in the Lake District. So there'd be strangers passing through all the time. And he'd just talk to complete strangers. And I was like, oh, that's normal. So I'd never had a problem with that. And I probably helped I was northern as well because, it's people are a little bit more personable and blah, blah, blah. Whereas you move into the hectic, the pace of the city, people tend not to talk to each other quite as much. And it was just this skill I had. So for me, it was almost validating my experience all the time. And it wasn't showing off. It was if they had a question and I didn't know the answer, I'd say, I'll go and find out for you. And it was having that, again, level of service it comes down to, is that I'm explaining to them how knowledgeable and how good I am. Also, they got results, right? So there's also looking at the things like, nutritional practices is that, I ascertained very early that telling someone what to do doesn't work. Explaining to someone why they shouldn't do something is probably more effective exercise. So like I was saying before about the alcohol thing, I'm not asking them to change a habit. I'm explaining to them why they should change a habit. So there was all these different, there was a lot of psychology involved, there's a lot of things and areas that I hadn't really studied. So I started to dig into them and I was like, well, hold on. If I understand the psychology of people a little bit better and I understand, I remember I bought this book and I was actually talking about it to my wife not so long ago because, I've got these epic bookshelves and there's all these books on them and I'm like, I should maybe get rid of some of them because there's certain ones I don't read anymore. And there was a book on obesity prevention that I bought a long time ago and I paid, I think, about £200 and something for it. And this was a long time ago. And it's like this thick. It's like a Bible. It's enormous. And the digging through it, the complexities behind obesity, which was a lot of time what we were dealing with. We were dealing with people who had higher levels of, body fat levels than they wanted. So it was looking at the psychology behind it, the rationale, all these different things. Then also from that, you develop this level of empathy to, you didn't just look at someone and you have this harsh reality in the fitness industry where people, you'd have these coaches that have always been naturally lean, and have this really stern look on, look, you just need to sort yourself out. You just need, whereas you had to have that level of empathy that it's very complex and it's not as simple. And I grew up in an era where people were like, it's really simple. You're going to eat less, you're going to move more. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't, mechanically it works. That works. It's exactly what you should be doing. But executing it isn't the same. It's a bit like telling someone, who's a bit strapped for cash, work more, work harder. It's not that simple. You've got to approach things with an intelligent outlook. Because somebody who's got a lot of negative thoughts or is constantly battling against, even, again, we talked about sleep before, somebody who's sleep deprived because of stress or whatever it might be. And remember, a lot of these things, they create this cascade of things that happen. If you're stressed about money, you therefore don't sleep very well. And you therefore start not doing the things that you enjoy. So your dopamine levels drop and you start to become very unhappy. And therefore, when you're very unhappy and you're sleep deprived, do you really want to work harder? And you get stuck in this kind of rut. And it was always about looking at my clients and going, what rut are they in right now? One of the first things I always say to all my clients when they walk through the door is, how's your week been? Because I was like this psychologist, and all I was an ear. I was somebody they didn't know, somebody they could relate to some degree, and somebody who could, they could speak to on their level. And it wasn't about, and this was another thing, is these were all hugely successful people that technically should intimidate me. It was like working with actors and actresses. I worked with a lot of really famous people in my time. And it was this thing of, I've just got to treat that person like a person. And if you do, you get a shed load of respect from them because they're like, nobody treats me like that.
And then they listen and then they get results.
And then they listen and then they get results. So it all comes down to almost a level of respect. And obviously when you're charging large fees, it's a bit like anything, right? If you take this cup, if you'd spent a week's wages on that cup and you bought it yourself and you know how much work you put in to earn the money to buy that cup, you're going to respect that cup. It's like when you get gifted something, you don't look after it very well because there was no graft, it wasn't you that brought all that together, right? Whereas when you buy something yourself or you have something that you've worked hard for, you respect it more, you look after it more and blah, blah, blah. And it's a similar sort of thing, right? Have that respect for your clients and treat them well and answer their questions and blah, blah, blah. And they have that level of respect. So when they've got that level of respect, literally, I would have clients that I could tell them to, pat their stomach and rub their head. They do it, and you get to that level. And one of the conversations I always have with new coaches is, you're not there yet. You're not there yet, but you've got to work hard at getting there. Young coaches, I'm like, you're going to deal with a client who's in their 40s, they've got so much more life experience than you, blah, blah, blah. And you've got to somehow get them to do what you tell them to do. That's difficult. And there'd be attributes. I remember a great guy I did a lot of work with, who, Harry, his name was, and doing incredible things in the fitness industry now. But he came to one of our seminars and he was the youngest lad in the seminar by a country mile, but he also looked young. And he was going in and he was going to be servicing these clients. And I said, this is going to be one of the biggest problems you got. And it was just the reality of it. This is the big problem that you've got. So you've got to overcome that and use it to your advantage to some degree. And it was looking at physical attributes of coaches or distinctive features or things about them and go leverage the hell out of that. You know, if you've got a background of, you know, I was overweight as a kid. I was, you know, I really struggled with my weight as a kid. That's leverage for me. Because when I tell people that story, they're like, oh, he gets it. You know, whereas if I've been lean my entire life, talking to somebody who's hugely overweight, they're going to be like, you don't understand. And they're probably right. So it was always this walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So if you're a coach who deals with, you know, clients who are overweight, you've got to kind of understand what that process involves. You know, it isn't just a matter of, oh, they've eaten too much and they haven't exercised enough. It isn't a matter of that. There's far more complex things at play here. You know, you got to remember that one of the most accessible sources of dopamine and pleasure that we've got as human beings is food. You know, and if it's not food, it's drink. You know, and remember that the type of people who don't sleep well, they're relying on alcohol to help them sleep. You know, then they're relying on stimulants, and then you get dysfunction within, you know, all kind of the metabolic, you know, your HPA axis gets knocked out, your glucose metabolism gets knocked out. You've got all these different things coming into play. And coaches aren't considerate of that.
There's been a rise of small group personal training facilities. 90% of FMA clients, we're currently looking after 400 plus gyms, they're group training facilities. People watching this, mainly group training facilities, and it's just the nature of the beast of what we do. There's always going to be a churn in a service-based business. What can these group training facilities do to, you know, reduce this churn of clients and provide a better service on the gym floor, and then advise the clients on all things well-being?
I think the key word there is, you said service on the gym floor, service off the gym floor. You know, you've got to look at what is the added value. You know, what are you delivering to these clients that is in excess of what the next person is? Because remember, the challenge of so if we take tiers of what we're dealing with, so I always talk about, you know, ultra high net worth service is a tier above everything. You get to charge more, but your delivery has to be impeccable. Then you've got regular personal training. Now that's one-on-one. It's not more difficult to get clients, but again, when we look at group coaching is an easier model commercially, because if I go, and this is all related to the area, right? So the current financial climate right now suits group training, right? Because people have looked at, in the last 12 months, and this may go on for another year or so, whilst we're in this financial crisis, people look at the things, like everybody does, you look at the things that are luxuries. You look at the things that are, you know, that are something that really, a lot of the time I probably can afford, but I'm thinking, that's a bit of a luxury I shouldn't be spending money on, right? So people look at things like that and they'll go, personal training, no. You know, it's £80, £100, whatever it might be per hour. But there's a group training model that's £80 a week or £10 a session or whatever it might be. They're like, I can move to that. And also it gives me a community, which a lot of people strive for, right? People want community. They want to talk to people. They want to see how everybody else's lives are going. And especially in times like we've got now, is that people want to, it's a bit like being relatable on social media. The second you become relatable, people have an affinity towards you. They're warm to you. And personal training is very much that. But then group training is all about, you know, I'm going to spend time with people who are probably there for the same reasons I am. Either want to get fit, they want to lose some weight, whatever it might be. So instantly I've got a connection with them. It's a bit like having a football team. You know, you walk into a pub of fans, you feel there's something there, right? I've got a connection. You know, it's like walking past someone in the street who's wearing the same shoes as you. Instantly, there's some kind of connection there.
Or Whoop.
Whoop. Everybody goes on about the Whoop thing. It's like, who was it? Sam Cornforth. Did you see his video?
Yeah,
brilliant. And he's like, he saw someone on the train with a Whoop, and it was this whole, it was brilliant. Check it out. It's brilliant. But but you're right. It's community. So you now know, I'm part of that community. You're wearing a Whoop.
Yes, yeah.
There we go. So we're part of the same community. So straight away, we've got something in common. We're interested in the metrics. We're interested in the data. So straight away, as a business, I'm gonna target you because I know I can move the numbers on that. You know, so we do a lot of work with Whoop because we want their community. So therefore, I want to work with Whoop. So do events with them and do bits and pieces because I want their community. So going back to the group training thing, and the group training thing is about what is the added value. You know, I talk to the guys who are doing with the high net worths. If you're dealing with high net worths are now looking And again, we go through all the stats, and if we look at remember, when we look at high net worths, you've got different generational wealth. You've got to understand whether it's first generation, second generation, third generation. And you've got to understand that first generation wealth comes from different places than it used to 50 years ago. So you've got a lot of tech, you've got a lot of social media stuff, so the type of person you're dealing with is very different. You've got to understand that. So depending on who you're working with in these generations of wealth, depends on what you need to deliver. But what we're finding now and what we're moving into is an era where that sort of first generational wealth is now handing it down to third or fourth generation. And that third or fourth generation are all about wellness, because they don't need to worry about work. They don't need to worry about finances. They don't need to worry about day-to-day stuff that most people need to worry about. But what they want to do is look after their wellness, because they've witnessed this cohort of people before them that have just got it drastically wrong. You look at the city workers. City workers now are all about wellness. A lot of them don't drink. So we were chatting to somebody from one of the big banks, can't remember who it was, and they said the vast majority of employees that we're taking in that between the age of 18 and 25 don't drink. He goes, because we've got this culture of drinking. Everybody goes to the pub after work because they've had a stressful day, and most of them struggle with sleep, and most of them overstimulate, and blah, blah, blah. And we've got this culture. And they said this culture's changing because these people coming in now, they just don't drink. They don't touch alcohol. And they all go to the gym, and they're all into fitness, and they're all about wellness, and that environment changes. And when you start to understand that, you start to understand why group coaching right now is hugely successful. Go back 10 years, I consulted with a guy up in Stoke-on-Trent, very successful, opened a massive warehouse-style group facility. And this was early doors, right? This was when group training wasn't really a big thing. And he built this massive premises, and at the time, Stoke had, I think, it had the highest unemployment statistic in the UK. So you've got all these people who are looking for community. Because remember, if you go to low-income areas, what do you find a lot of? You find a lot of pubs. You find a lot of nail salons. You find a lot of tattoo places. Because people are looking for identity. They want identity. They want to be involved with something. They want to be part of a group, right? So what he did is he built this, and I don't know whether there was thought behind it, a process or whatever, or he just looked around and go, this is what people want. And he built this incredible, and there'd be hundreds of people at every class. It was enormous, it's massive, and he's still going today. And I remember I used to do a bit of consultancy. He used to get a train down to London every week to see me. And he built the same facility in Manchester city centre, and it flopped because it wasn't the type of clientele that wanted community. They didn't want to buy hoodies. They didn't want to be part of a bigger group. They wanted individualism. You go into Mayfair, you try and get people in Mayfair
to do a group class.
They're like, no, I'm happy with my network. I don't want to meet other people.
Pay premium.
Yeah, and I don't want other people around me. Because at that point in their career, in their stage of life, they're like, I don't want that. I'm like, we have 3 kids at one's just finished, but we had 3 kids at one point at 3 different schools. And, there's this parent thing, and I'm like, I don't want to be involved with that. I said, I don't want to be involved with.
You don't want to be in the parent WhatsApp group?
No, categorically I don't. I mean, my wife is better, but even she doesn't really want to be in it.
Yeah.
But she is, and by default we've actually got a bunch of friends, that have expanded from it. But at the time I was sort of, look, I don't want more friends. I don't want. But you find people who, they sing from the same song sheet.
Yeah. I think it's the ethos that you explained that you were doing back in the day when PTing, taking that into that group training format and treating everyone as an individual, but in that group.
Yeah.
And really just going above and beyond with every interaction that you have with them and installing your knowledge and information into them so that they may make the correct decisions outside of the gym.
It's a lot of work, right? One of the things I always say, it's and I had this, I think it was either Pure Gym or Virgin Active, who I've done a lot of work with it historically. And I remember talking to the employees and I said, name badges. And we're like, and you get the rebellious, they're like, I don't want to wear a name badge. Mate, you do understand what they're there for. I go to a 5-star hotel, right? I will see a name badge. That means I'm going to address that person by name. If I address them by name, instantly they feel more kin and associated with me, right? Instantly they're like, that person's respected me. Call me by my name. The next thing they'll do is find out what my name is. And you go to a big high-end hotel, they already know what your name is. You will walk through the door and they'll greet you as Mr. Learney or whatever it might be. And that's what you're really paying for. Now in group facilities, the problem is that you'll have a coach who's coaching the same group of people, and there's one local to us, and I've witnessed it and watched them do it. And the problem is the same people turn up every week, and the instructor has no idea what anybody's called, and that is a big thing. If you can greet people by name going into a group training facility, it's massive. I always said one of the best lead acquisitions you can do as a coach. And one of the first things I did at Third Space, when I went to Third Space, everybody was like, 3 weeks, I've got a waiting list. And I've picked up clients internally within this gym. And all I did is I used to stand at reception. I've told this tale a million times. They used to have this beautiful, curved reception. But I could stand at one corner and watch people when they swiped and checked in. The name came up on the screen. So I'd get their name. Then I'd go onto the gym floor and I'd introduce myself. And I'd call them by their first name. That's all I did. And I did that for the first couple of weeks. And by the end of that later in that second week, I had a waiting list of clients. And all it was all these people on the gym floor who wanted a coach, but they'd never been approached by one. And all I did was introduce myself. Hey, I'm Phil. I'm one of the new coaches here. They'd be like, yeah, I've been looking for a coach for ages, but I was never quite sure who I should have or whatever. Have you got any availability? I'm like, yep, there you go. And it was easy. And they had to actually change the rules for me, because part of what we did when we were new coaches, we had to do inductions. The problem is I converted every induction. And because I had a waiting list very quickly, we'd finish the end of the induction, I'd add all this extra value, and they'd be like, oh my God, I want Phil as a coach. And I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm full.
And they're just disappointed.
Hugely disappointed. And then they were the ones that sat on my wait list. It was the same people from the inductions that sat on my wait list. Because they were like, I've never had an induction like this. Nobody's ever addressed these things, and nobody's ever, I remember chatting with one of my old clients, is actually a business partner of mine with Human 24 now. He's my best friend. We ended up getting on really well. He was the best man at what we were in, blah, blah, blah. But he's like my mentor. And we were chatting about it the other day, and we were chatting with somebody else, and he was telling them the story of how we met. And he said, I came in for my first session, and I'd actually accidentally double booked him. And I can't remember this. And he said, I was so disappointed. And then I came in from the next session all dressed, ready to go. And I pulled him to one side and took him in the office and talked to him about nutrition for an hour. And I said, look, your problem isn't your training. I'd been watching him train with another trainer on the gym floor for God knows how long. I said, your training's not your problem. I said, so I could work you just as hard as your other kid, and, obviously structurally I'd changed a lot of stuff, but ultimately he was working hard. Really hard, but he lost 9 and a bit stone with me, over the course of 2 years, and it was because we looked at his lifestyle, not his training. He was already working his ass off. He was one of those, classically, hugely overweight, but super fit.
Which is what is happening in a lot of these group training facilities, where people are just coming in, they're doing 3-4 sessions a week, sweat session, and then there's no conversation with the coach or the owner of the business about their lifestyle outside of that.
No, which therefore you don't get results.
And then they churn and they go to the next sweat session.
Expecting it's going to do the same thing, and then they churn again, and then they do it again.
Because the business owner or coach has not had that hard conversation and installed their knowledge into that.
Yeah, and all they want is they want somebody with answers. Because they come to you with a problem. I've started this group coaching because I've got a problem. I want to be fitter. I want to, it might be an entry point because they want to join the CrossFit club down the road. I want to get myself, it's like that old thing that you hear with clients to say, I want to do PT, but I want to get myself a little bit fit before I come and do PT. I'm like, hold on. Where's that logic? That's the reason you're coming to me, but I want to get myself a little fitter before I start. It's almost like you want to get that momentum going. And remember, a lot of group training facilities are access to PT. I always said to, big box gyms, I used to get owners of these private facilities that having meltdowns because of Pure Gym opening on the corner from them. I'm like, why are you having a meltdown? I said, that is a massive opportunity. They're going to do all the marketing. They're going to pull loads of people to the area who are going to train in there. And it's almost like a stepping stone. They're going to train in there. They're going to get themselves relatively fit. Then they're going to go, well, I could do with some coaching here. So am I going to take one of the coaches on in Pure Gym? I might. But maybe I'm kind of bored of all the people around, blah, blah, blah. Maybe I want a bit more private attention. And now I feel like I've invested in myself by doing this on a regular basis. And now I want to invest financially. So I'm going to go down to that private facility down the road because it's more exclusive. They deliver a better service. They look at nutrition. They do all these other bits and pieces. And that was the thing. I was like, as long as your service is better than what they're delivering at Pure Gym, which is a big box, high market model, which is always going to be, I said, if your service is worse than theirs, you got to ask questions. If your service is better, it's cool. They're just going to filter from there into you. but you've got to make it very obvious that your service is way better. So you've got to communicate that, and that's part of marketing, right?
I'm sure everyone would love to know what is your current routine with training, nutrition, and then sleep, and then let's go into sleep and how us as business owners can improve it, and then how we can teach that to clients.
Okay, where to start? Consistency is the key thing. Again, we talked about this right at the very start, is that I have to determine what time I'm going to get up and what time I'm going to go to bed. Right, that's my first non-negotiable, and there'll be a slight flux with that. So I'll always give myself a little bit of leeway. It's normally about 15 minutes either way, so I can get up 15 minutes earlier. And sometimes that naturally will happen. But essentially, I want to keep those times as consistent as possible.
Using an alarm, or you have 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
Are they waking you up, or?
No, sometimes, but for the most part, no. One's 18, one's 15, and the other one's 5. So she coming up for 5. So she's on occasion she will wake us up, but for the most part, again, it's the same with kids, right? We put them in that routine, they stay in that routine. We let them diversify from that routine. All hell breaks loose, right? Kids are some of the best examples of circadian biology there are, because it's all about routine. You get them into a routine, they'll continue in that routine. So it's determining what time I'm going to get up, what time I'm going to go to bed. And that has to remain consistent 7 days a week, not different on the weekends. One of the biggest problems we have is weekends where people shift things. It's what we call social jet lag, and I'll explain that in a second. So consistency. Next thing I've got to do is understand that my biological rhythm is determined by light, right? Light is what we call, it's the largest, Zeitgeber is the term they use, a time giver. So light is my main key to my biological rhythm. So when light hits your optic nerve, there's a cascade of biological events that start to happen. One of the main things that first happens and the most obvious is melatonin levels go down and serotonin levels go up, but it requires light. Now, if you wake up in the pitch black dark, which some people will do in winter, so if you consistently get up at 5, 6 a.m., which will be the case with a lot of trainers, the problem you might have is that in winter, you might not see daylight for another 4.5 hours. Now, in those 4.5 hours, your body continues to produce melatonin. So biologically, you're still asleep. You're just in a very low level of sleep. Because remember, we have different levels of sleep, right? Deep sleep, blah, blah, blah. And at certain levels, we can still pretty much operate. When you look at people who consistently come out of sleep, people with things like sleep apnea, they'll wake up 100 times during the night, but they won't know they've woken up. But what actually happens here is that biologically, our stopwatch that has to go through a bunch of chemical sequences before it prepares you for bed. And we need about 18 hours to prepare for bed, roughly, 16 to 18 hours. And if we don't prepare for bed correctly, we've got a problem. So light exposure in the morning is one of the key ones. So for me, one of the first things I do is I have an SAD light, so seasonal affective disorder light, which means I can now govern my light exposure in the morning. So the first thing I do, I go down to my office and I put the light on. I then hydrate. So the first thing I'll do, I'll take one of the hydrate sachets. This is key because we fast. Me and my wife both fast. So we won't eat till midday, and we stop eating around about 8 p.m. That's kind of cut off. We have our evening meal probably about 6:30. And that's more of a cultural thing, and we might get into this, might not, but fasting, the 8-16 in fasting is based around circadian biology. So in essence, the way we should work it is we wake up, we have an 8-hour eating window. I shift hours, so culturally we can still have an evening meal with the kids. Otherwise, I'd finish consuming food about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, which means I don't get to sit down with my kids. So we fast till midday, which means I now get to sit down with my kids. It means that I'm not optimal with respect to circadian biology, but it's one compromise that enables me to do things that are important to me, right? So it's a bit like work. We have an 8-hour window in which we should facilitate work. We don't. Most people work in 9-5, which was invented by Henry Ford in 1926. No consideration of biology whatsoever. Human beings don't really operate after the first 8 hours. Cognitively, we decline quite rapidly, which is what people class as a slump. And then we caffeinate, and then we disrupt sleep, and blah, blah, blah. So I'll expose my optic nerve to light. When I do that, that means I've governed my day. It means that 16 hours later, my body's prepped and ready for sleep, which means I can maintain the same sleep time. Now, when the clocks change and all these different things, that disrupts that whole thing. If I sleep in on weekends, that disrupts that whole thing. So I have that consistency, expose my optic nerve to light, hydrate, I jump in an ice bath, which again is going to be controversial, right? People are like, "Rrr." But I've been doing ice baths for about 20 years for different reasons. I was a competitive powerlifter, and tendon and ligament inflammation was a big thing for me. So if I can't reduce the inflammation on tendons and ligaments, professional athletes, same thing. Professional athletes have been doing ice baths for forever. And some of it's based off anecdote, some of it's based off research, but nobody's really researched ice baths because there's never been any money in it. Now there's money in it. So there's a lot of research now come in, it all come through, and they talk about dopamine levels and blah, blah, blah. And some of the stories, the dopamine, the study that was on dopamine was actually people were in a bath for, I think, 60 minutes, and it was at about 14 degrees. So what the hypothesis is that if we take the temperature down and down and down, you get that dopamine response even quicker, which again seems to be the case. So ice bath is part of my routine.
Do you go outside or is it
outside? Yeah, it's outside. So I go outside. The temp is normally set anywhere between, so on weekends, because it's a treat on a weekend, I drop it down to 0.3, which means it's ice. And then during the week, I do about 2 degrees. So I get in the ice bath, I do 3 minutes in it consistently on a daily basis. And also it's that thing of psychologically, I start my day with something that I kind of don't want to do, But it's bizarre is that the days that I don't get to do it, we're going away this weekend, and I'm not going to get to do it this weekend, and I'll miss it. It's weird, which again is, when you look at something that's really difficult and you've got millions of people doing it, and you look at the science and go, well, science doesn't tell us it's, we don't know it yet. But when you've got millions of people doing something that's difficult, which human beings don't do that. They don't go back to doing things that are difficult unless something's biologically or chemically happening. So the research will come, and I'm a big fan of it, cold water immersion. So start my day there. Then I won't eat till lunchtime. We get most of our food delivered. I use a company called The Good Prep. You're probably familiar with them. Great guys, great quality food. So I'll have 2 to 3 meals from them during the course of the day, and then we will typically use either Gusto or Hello Fresh, which means that every day we cook. Every day the kids have an opportunity to cook as well, which I think is a skill that a lot of people lack. And it means we get to sit down as a family and eat a meal together. And that's why we do the fasting until midday, because it fits with a better home life in essence. And obviously the kids have a school routine now. If everything was based around skating biology, the kids will be way back home by that point. You look at the Scandinavian universities, they're moving all the start times earlier because they know that they perform better within the hours of light. So if you think about first 8 hours of the day should be in complete daylight, second 8 hours should be in dimming light, and the next 8 hours should be in pitch black darkness. That's your 3 8-hour cycles, which again fits with skating biology, fits with fasting, blah, blah, blah. Because remember, most mammals wake up to sunlight. They hunt, they scavenge, they do whatever they need to do for food, they consume it, then they sit down about 8 hours later and rest and digest and sleep. And all the activity was done in the first part of the day. So this is when we look at biology, this is how we should in essence function as mammals. So that's my meal routine. That enables me to maintain and monitor my calories very easily, because I know every meal, what's in them. On a weekend, those sleep and wake times remain consistent. If they get knocked out of sync, so I had a dinner on last Thursday. So I had a networking dinner and, got in quite late. And now the instant reaction to somebody going out late is to sleep in. Now, if you sleep in, so if you think about it, if I stay out late, the only problem I've got the next morning is sleep debt. I owe myself some sleep. If I sleep in, I've now shifted my entire biological rhythm. So I'm now on a different time zone. One of the problems I have there is what they class as social jet lag. So if you go out on Friday night and stay out late, sleep in on a Saturday morning, by the time you get to Monday, you're in New York. So you've got jet lag. So you've got all the symptoms of jet lag, you've got all the biological problems, so your emotional reactivity is up, your hormonal axis is out of sync, your autonomic nervous system is all over the place, so your sympathetic and parasympathetic responses are all over the place, your glucose metabolism is down, your leptin and ghrelin are all out of sync, desync. That's why on Monday morning everybody wants to eat crappy food, or on a Sunday morning, whichever way you want to look at it. And if there's been alcohol involved, it's even worse. So you're also in sleep debt because you've been asleep for 6 to 8 hours. Because remember, sleeping for 6 to 8 hours is about duration, which has been always the lowest common denominator. Now with Whoops and things like this, we can measure sleep. But 6 to 8 hours is a bit like me saying to you, I want to get, you coming to me and saying, I want to get fit or I want to get stronger. And all I say to you is you need to go to the gym 3 hours a week, 3 times a week for an hour at a time. Same as that. I don't tell you what you need to do when you get there. Sleep is the same, right? All I'm telling you to do is you have to spend 8 hours in bed. That's what I'm telling you to do. I'm not telling you what you need to do when you get there. I'm not telling you about the quality and the depth and the architecture and the consistency. I'm not telling you about any of that. And I'm not looking to improve any of it because historically we didn't know how to. We do now. We know how to improve sleep consistency. We know how to improve sleep duration. We know that inflammation affects people's ability to sleep. So one of the key things we need to do is reduce inflammation. So, this is why things like recovery modalities, ice baths, people wearing compression leggings and all these things are all about reducing inflammation. Pro athletes, what's the goal of pro athletes? Keep them in a non-inflammatory state. If you can do that, you can keep training them. The second they're inflamed, we've got to then rest, recover, which is part of that process of bringing down inflammation, then we can go again. But if we don't get on top of that, an athlete doesn't get enough sleep. So every time an athlete doesn't get enough sleep, their injury risk just goes up and up and up and up and up until they get injured. And this is what we look at with pro teams, when we look at working with the F1 drivers. All of that is about, so again, we mentioned F1 prior to the interview, but they're high-level athletes, and it's not just the drivers, it's the entire team. The entire team, they've got 26 races in this season. They changed times 16 times, quite significantly for some of them. So they're shifting their time zones all the time. Now, every time they shift their time zone, they affect their performance because the human body is designed to peak at certain performance parameters at certain times of the day, which is why they acclimatize. It's very difficult for an F1 driver to acclimatize because they move around so fast. Whereas if you've got a single event, you've got somebody who's competed. There's one of the big American teams, ice hockey, went to Australia to play ice hockey in Australia. And they employed someone to look after jet lag and acclimatization. So a circadian scientist, essentially. So they brought them in and said, look, we're going to Australia. There's I can't remember what it was, 8 hours or 9 hours or whatever difference. They're like, we need to adjust our athletes. And again, when you look at it from a very loose standpoint, for every hour that you shift, it takes you 24 hours to reacclimatize. So if you think about going out Friday night, you stay out till your normal bedtime is 10, you stay out till 2, you're 4 hours out. You sleep in the next day for 4 hours. You're not just 4 hours out, i.e. you've got your 4 hours of sleep, you've actually shifted yourself by 4 hours. So you're in a different country. Now, for all those 4 hours, you've just shifted your biology, you've now got to take you 4 days to reacclimatise. If you do that again on Saturday, you've got no chance. By the time you reacclimatise, it's Thursday again, then you go out Friday and Saturday, and then you're in that cycle again. Now, if you've got disruption of that circadian biology, you've got major health complications. Major. Metabolic, heart, cancer risk goes up. Again, there's a lot of studies on shift work. What's shift work? Exactly what I'm talking about. Shift work is just people moving it back and forward all the time by 4 or 5 hours at a time, potentially sometimes even more. And their cancer risk goes up infinitely. Shift work is classed as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization and has been for about the last 5 years, which means they probably knew about it 15 years ago. So we know that shifting your biological rhythm isn't a good thing. Now, the mental health impact is huge. Your emotional responsiveness. If you're tired, how do you react to things?
Not good.
Positively or negatively, right? There isn't any positive. Oh, I'm tired and it means I'm more affectionate towards my kids and I spend more time with them and blah, blah, blah. You're not, And a lot of the people that I dealt with, these high stress individuals, lots and lots of money, hugely successful, but the blueprint that they used to get to that point was lack of sleep, loads of stimulants, stay at work as long as you can, damage your relationships. Most of them were on second, third wives, didn't have a relationship with their kids, because these are the sacrifices we're told that you have to make. But in reality, what we're realizing now is, hold on, you can actually have a successful business and also stay in condition. You can have a successful business and also have a relationship with your kids and have a successful family life. There might be limits, but ultimately you're in charge of managing those things. And again, all the surveys and the interviews they've done with, high net worths, they're like, would you trade it all off? Yeah, I'd trade a lot of it just to be healthy. And this is what's happening now, is you're getting all these super wealthy people in the 60s who realise they've probably got 10 years left.
So your dinner at 6:30 and then you're in prep for bed. Do you have any other gadgets or anything that you use or you would recommend to prep you for that?
I've got a load of gadgets that I use compression things on my legs, so Normatex. So probably 3 nights a week after training, I will use them.
What time are you training?
Oh, we train first thing in the morning.
Okay.
So after the school run. So my wife does the school run. I'll do a bunch of work just before. Again, won't consume anything for the first 60 to 90 minutes. So just going back at the morning. So light exposure, do the ice bath. 60 to 90 minutes later, which is after I finish my hydrate sachet, I then have my rise.
Let's talk about this hydrate sachet. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm just holding this up right now. Tell me.
So that's a high concentration electrolyte. So one of the things that happens when people fast, so if you fast, your insulin levels go down. If your insulin levels go down, your body essentially eradicates sodium. So your usage and requirement of sodium goes up. If you've got somebody who eats very clean, their sodium levels are normally quite low. If you've got somebody who's eating a processed food diet, you don't really need to worry about sodium. So all these years where people are going blood pressure, sodium levels, cholesterol, sodium levels, blah, blah, these are people with bad diets. We make the assumption that the vast majority of people who are going to be using our supplements typically will have a good diet. They might be keto, they might be low carb, they might be fasting. They're probably going to be doing one or all four of those to some degree. So therefore, we know that when they wake up in the morning, they're depleted in essential electrolytes. So if the first thing I can do in the morning is rather than somebody just grabbing a glass of water, which in essence just dilutes electrolytes, we put a high concentration electrolyte in, the first thing I've done is to hydrate your cells. Now, I've just increased your performance across the board, physically and cognitively, across the board. Now I've done that, you've taken, so there's 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium there. So it's a high concentration. We're about 5 to 6 times stronger than most electrolytes on the market. Now, when you take that, it's very salty, instantly you're hydrated, right? So your cells are now hydrated. So the first job I've ticked off, hydrated. I've then done the hard thing in the morning. The ice bath, for me, is the ice bath. It could be anything, but do something difficult. Military talk about making the bed. It's probably not as strenuous as an ice bath, but it's still accomplished something. Done. 60 to 90 minutes later, I take rise. Now, caffeine shouldn't be taken in the first 60 to 90 minutes of the day, because we have what is called a cortisol awakening response. So the thing that wakes you up is cortisol. And cortisol rises to take you out of a parasympathetic state, rest and digest state, and move you into a sympathetic state, which has always been practiced as a fight or flight. It's not fight or flight, it's a wake alert response. Now, because there's an nth degree to that, so if I put you under huge stress, your fight or flight response kicks in, adrenaline goes up, pupils dilate, all these things. And then you go into what's truly the fight or flight response. Now, when we're awake, we're in a fight or flight response, which is in a very low key level of it. So we're alert, we're awake, we can cognitively function, we can do all these things. So the reason you don't take caffeine is it disrupts that cortisol awakening response. The other reason you don't take caffeine is if we sleep well, you disperse a compound called adenosine. Adenosine drives sleep pressure. So adenosine is part of ATPPC. Most of the people listening to this should understand what ATPPC is. So a byproduct of energy production is we become tired. The more we challenge energy, the more tired we become, because the byproduct of energy production, utilising ATPPC, is we start to stockpile adenosine. The more adenosine we have in our system, the more tired we are. So when we sleep, if we sleep efficiently, one of the jobs that your body does is your lymphatic system in your brain clears all the adenosine. So when you wake up in the morning, there's two things. Cortisol's going up. I know that. So the second you wake up, cortisol keeps going up. The way that we simulate that sometimes is with an alarm clock. Because what's an alarm clock? It's a siren. What happens when a siren goes off? Cortisol will go up. Your heart rate goes up. So it wakes us up effectively, but ultimately it's then disrupting our cortisol awakening response. So really we want to wake up quite gently. We don't want to wake up to a siren or an alarm. So if you've got an alarm clock, your alarm clock's going to be relatively low. What you'll find is if you habitually get up at the same time, your body will wake you up before you wake up because you train the cortisol awakening response. So in the morning, I know that for 45 to 60 minutes, your cortisol is going to carry on rising. Caffeine does that. It's part of the mechanism on how it works. It jacks up your sympathetic nervous system. Now I don't need to do that because your body's naturally doing it anyways. Second thing is your adenosine levels are at zero if you've slept well. Second way in which caffeine works, it's an adenosine receptor antagonist. So it prevents sleep pressure build in your brain. When you wake up in the morning, there is no sleep pressure. So what are you preventing? So if you take caffeine first thing in the morning and it works, what's that telling you? There's adenosine. If there's adenosine, it means that your sleep pressure is still high. It means your sleep quality is out. You with me? So 60 to 90 minutes later, I take rise. So you got caffeine, you got theanine.
Is this before the workout?
Yes. Yeah, so it doubles in many respects for me as a pre-workout. Now, depending on what I'm working out for, will depend on what other components I add, because that isn't a pre-workout. That's a morning optimization drink. Now, at that point, what the caffeine and the theanine does, it extends my alertness and keeps it higher for longer. Because what the theanine does, it means that caffeine doesn't really spike. it levels it a little bit. So they act almost against each other, but collectively. And again, there's a ton of research on the 2-to-1 ratio with respect to theanine. So people who get anxiety and the jitters from caffeine, you won't get that with that. So what we get is this increased, and alertness stays higher for longer. If I had some charts, I'd be able to show you. But in essence, alertness stays higher for a little bit longer, which means my performance goes up, which therefore now I've used caffeine as a performance enhancer. Whereas before I was using it as something to patch up bad sleep. So I've now used it as a performance enhancer aid, which again, we've got hundreds of thousands of studies that tell us it's an incredible performance enhancer. So that's what I've done. Now, when I get into the gym, depending on what my goal is in the gym, I might add some other compounds, which we don't do because we're not sports performance, but I might add something like beta-alanine. If I'm an endurance athlete, I might use sodium bicarb. I might use an extended level of creatine. We use 2.2 grams in there. That's for cognitive function.
In Rise.
In Rise, yeah. So it's not for physical function. So because of the type of training I do, typically, I will add more creatine. So I'll put another half a teaspoon of creatine in, which gets me up to the 5 grams. I might add beta-alanine. I might add arginine, and again, IOC have 5 ingredients listed. So they list creatine, caffeine, beta-alanine, sodium bicarb, and nitrates. They're the only 5 they list as performance enhancing. So nitrates are things like arginine. We get it from beetroot. And so out of what I would add, it'll be something in that component. Sodium bicarb is a bit risky. There's actually, again, I'll give another company a product plug here. It's a company called Morton that do a paste, sodium bicarb paste. Now, one of the biggest challenges you've had with sodium bicarb, this is going back to my sports science days, is that if you get the dosage wrong,
pass through,
it has quite detrimental effects, which is why a lot of people don't mess with it. But they've created this paste that evidently, I've talked to a lot of top cyclists who are using it, and apparently the dosing is perfect with it.
So I did my first ever half marathon a few weeks back, and I took that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt great.
It's risky. See, sodium bicarb is very risky if you take it in its powder form and you get the dosage slightly wrong. It's detrimental. But this paste is evidently very, very good. So again, nice product plug from Morton there. But it's an area we'll never touch. Sports performance. We're not looking at sports performance. We're looking at daytime function and your wake performance. So essentially, the impact we have is significantly more than sports performance. Remember, people work out for about 4% of their lives. They sleep and function for another 96. We're looking after the 96. So we're making sure that when you go into work, you're on top form, you wake up effectively, your mood levels are stable, your overall health markers improve. We look at all that. So the impact we have is significant. So I may rise 60 minutes later for that reason. So if you're going to have coffee or whatever it might be, and then the cutoff for rise, so if you read the back of the packet, it tells you 6 to 8 hours. That's the window you've got from the moment you wake up. Because if we consume in that, we've got enough time to metabolize the majority of the caffeine before you fall asleep. So anybody who's taking caffeine into the afternoon, you've got problems because it solves the problem. So in the afternoon, what happens is our alertness levels drop. Our cortisol levels move to a point where they're on the way down, but they get to a point where it's shifting you from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic response. Sleep pressure is halfway up. So sleep pressure is now moving you closer to sleep than you are to being awake. And this is the slump that people talk about. And you've also got a peak in sleep urge. You get 2 peaks of sleep urge. One is about 6 to 8 hours into your day. The other one is just before you go to bed or just as you fall asleep. So at that point, if I take caffeine, it jacks my alertness up, jacks my cortisol up, reduces my sleep pressure because it blocks sleep pressure reaching my brain. The problem I've just done is messed up my sleep. So it's a short-term solution and really it was the obvious solution because we've got all these problems at that particular time. The perfect solution is caffeine. But then that's an imperfect solution because now it's just disrupted your sleep. So that's what we created Flow for. So we created a caffeine-free nootropic. So alertness is the only thing we can extend at that point. So alertness is the only thing we can extend. So this is where nootropics come in. So we use lion's mane. We've got a full dose of lion's mane. We've got CDP cytcholine. We've got carnitine in there, and we've got B vitamins again, and we've got electrolytes. So what we're doing there is we're enhancing cognitive output. So we're increasing.
What time?
Again, slump time. So it's typically 6 to 8 hours after you wake up. So most people have their time where I'm starting to feel a bit lethargic. You want to kind of hit it probably 20 minutes before that. Now, there are other solutions. You could take a nap at that point. So we did some consultancy with one of the big Premier League teams who do a lot of evening kickoffs. So we use biphasic sleeping with them. So you take a nap in the afternoon, which again extends your wake period. So now you shift yourself back almost biologically a little bit, which means that a professional footballer kicking off at 8 o'clock can do all their post-match interviews and blah, 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 and not worry about getting sleep until 2 a.m. Whereas before what they're doing is they're strenuously trying to get to bed by midnight and they can't because their systems they're not correct for sleep. which is hence you look at did you see the Dele Alli podcast on Gary Neville's?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So he talked about the fact that a lot of Premier League footballers rely on sedatives, sleeping pills. This is why.
60,000 people cheering your name and at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And they'll jack you up on caffeine. So you've got all these problems, and then there's no wonder that the team doctors are giving them sedatives because they can't sleep. So what we do is we move a sleep cycle. So we give them 2 sleep cycles in the afternoon. Sleep cycle is 90 minutes. We let them do 2 sleep cycles in the afternoon, which means they then shift their entire rhythm.
Is that them going back to their hotel room or pods?
Hotel room, pods, whatever.
Or home,
wherever they've got, whatever they've got access to. And if they do 2 sleep cycles, we need biologically about 6 sleep cycles. So that means that player has only got to do 4 more sleep cycles, which means they can go to bed at 2 a.m. and still get up at 7, and they've nailed all 6 sleep cycles, which means they've got full recovery. So cognitive recovery, physical recovery means their injury risk remains low. There's no injury risk improvement or risk doesn't go up. So there's various mechanisms how to do that. But again, in reality, most people work a 9-5. So when you get to about 2-3 o'clock, when you're flagging, rather than grabbing caffeine, we design flow.
Or sugar.
Yeah, because again, your body's screaming for energy. It's going, I want energy, so I want sugar, I want caffeine. And remember, you look at most coffee shops, what do they sell? They've moved from selling coffee to selling sugar beverages with a load of caffeine in. Solves the problem. Energy drinks. What's an energy drink? It's packed full of fast energy, glucose, with a ton of caffeine. But energy drink manufacturers aren't going to tell you this. Neither is anybody selling coffee. They're not going to tell you that caffeine should only be consumed in the first 6 to 8 hours a day, but that's the reality if you want to manage your sleep. Now, if I get you to consume an energy drink at that point, guess what I've just done? I've guaranteed the next morning you wake up, you're going to have sleep pressure. So we're going to reach for stimulants. Who's selling stimulants? I am. So again, it's this circular thing of almost creating the problem and also creating the solution. But you'll never hear them scientifically talk about this thing because in reality, the science doesn't stack up for them. You should have rules on the back of a can or a drink that say you should not consume this after the first 6 to 8 hours a day. You can't say 2 p.m. because people get up at different times. Mark Wahlberg gets up at 3 a.m. It's not going to work for him. But 6 to 8 hours after he wakes up, or his first light exposure, he needs to stop consuming caffeine, otherwise it's going to disrupt his sleep cycle. But people don't say that. And then we've got pre-sleep, which I haven't brought with us. It's a capsule. So all we did with pre-sleep is we looked at, the first thing we did was look at the education. So it was, what is sleep made up of? We got sleep latency, which is the time it takes you to fall asleep. You got sleep consistency, which is the times that you consistently wake up or go to sleep. And consistency also ties in with how was you dropping into deep sleep and staying there. So if we were to address someone with sleep apnea, sleep consistency becomes a different terminology because sleep consistency is the fact that this person's waking up hundreds of times in a night, they just don't know it. Now, if you're inflamed, so let's say you've done a big leg session yesterday, every time you roll over, you wake up because you've got pain. So if you get people in chronic pain, if we use technology, so something like a flotation tank, guess what happens with the flotation tank? There's no pressure on any tissue. So people can sleep and recover. So if you've got somebody with chronic pain, a flotation tank is a good investment because they can sleep in it because there's no pressure on tissue and there's no, so all this tech that we talk about, so tech brings us back to, SAD lights. We can govern our own daylight if we use intelligent lighting systems and blah, blah, blah. I went into TikTok, who we work with, went into the offices and I used a light meter to measure the light all around their offices. Every single room was over 1,000 lux, which means people can perform in every single one of those rooms all day. Now, I went into another business in Canary Wharf. Half the building is fine, the other half isn't. So if you're in the dark side of the building, you're going to struggle for focus because if you're in a dark environment for long enough, your body starts to produce melatonin again because it thinks it's dark. It's normal biology. We've just done some work with wolves, and you probably saw wolves in the papers. They were wearing the daylight glasses. So the glasses that actually have lights built into them. So it hits your optic nerve and tells you it's daylight. So therefore your serotonin levels go up and it creates almost like this synthetic environment, which again is akin to, it's an SAD light basically on your eyes. So it's biohacking, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about. So sleep, we looked at latency, consistency, duration, which is the tick box. And we looked at architecture, which is how much deep sleep, slow wave sleep, blah, blah, blah. We said, right, what do we need to teach someone in order to improve all those things? Sleep hygiene, massive one for sleep latency and consistency. We've got to then look at caffeine management. We've got to look at alcohol. We've got to look at light management. We've got to look at all those basics. Now, if we educate all those things, we've improved someone's sleep without even talking about a supplement. Now, then we went to ingredients. So we looked at ingredients. We looked at ingredient quality. We looked at dosage, which is something that a lot of brands don't look at. So we use zinc picolinate, magnesium glycinate. Most brands don't. They use oxide because it's cheaper. But it's also not going to have the same effect. But the average person out there doesn't care because they're like, oh, I need to consume zinc and magnesium for sleep. Nobody ever talks about the forms.
Let's go to a high street shop where there's a 18, 20-year-old shop advisor who just says, oh, yeah, that's our sleep section of supplements. There you go. That's the best seller. I
mean, I did a presentation last week with potentially some of the best coaches in London. The majority of people in the audience didn't know the difference between zinc oxide and zinc picolinate. They didn't know the difference. You know, the nutritionist in the audience knew full what we were talking about. But again, the average consumer doesn't. So it's very easy to me to mug the average consumer off with cheap and nasty products or ingredients. So we looked at the ingredients. We said, right, what are the best ingredients that would elicit better sleep? What are the ones which will reduce inflammation? So we have leveragin in there. It's palmitoyl reduces inflammation, improves deep, slow wave sleep. And then we looked at everything else. We brought all that together in the dosages we need to. And then we've got a sleep supplement that doesn't knock you out, but improves the quality of sleep. If you wear a Whoop, we move the numbers. If you wear an Oura, we move the numbers.
You've seen that hard data?
Yeah, categorically. I'll give you some of the pre-sleep. You'll move the numbers. And the thing is that when you look at supplements, one of the biggest challenges you have with supplements, people want to feel something. Now, the problem you got with improving sleep, you're not going to feel anything because you're asleep. You might feel better when you wake up. You might feel cognitively more functional, blah, blah, blah. But again, you've got to have a lot of body awareness and self-awareness to acknowledge that.
How, at what time are you taking the supplement before?
Just before bed.
Literally? Okay.
Just before bed. So in the middle of the afternoon, I take my Flow. If I've then got another cognitive challenge later on in the day, I'll take another serving of Flow. So Flow can be taken literally right to bedtime. If you take it really late, your dreams will be crazy. Because what you've done is you've stimulated your brain. Nothing else is going to disrupt sleep, but then you're going to drop into a deep sleep and you're going to have wacky dreams, which again, I've actually experimented with a few times. But I do jiu-jitsu 2 times a week at 8:30 at night. Now, in order to learn jiu-jitsu, it's a skill-based sport. Now, my body isn't in tune for learning a skill at 8 p.m. at night. So what I do is I take a cognitive enhancer. So therefore, when I get there, I'm wide-eyed, I'm concentrating, I'm focusing, which means I learn the skill.
What are your workouts? So the wife does school run, you do some work, you come back and
we go to the gym.
You go to the gym, okay.
Yeah, we go to the gym. So we'll do, we train together 3 times a week. My wife does Pilates 3 times a week. And she has an evening class as well that she goes to one night. I'm injured at the moment, but I will typically do jiu-jitsu at least twice a week, which again, are predominantly evening sessions. But around that, I'll do lifting, which is normally appropriate to my goals at that particular time. Most of my stuff is focused around performance. You know, I do most of my lifting is about improving my jiu-jitsu game because that's my hobby at the moment, and will remain my hobby, I think, for a long time. But it's always been, my training's always been performance focused. You know, when I played rugby, it was focused towards rugby. When I powerlifted, all my training was about powerlifting. It was about improving the numbers and improving the outcome. And obviously at different times there's the aesthetic aspect to it, but the aesthetic aspect for me is mostly diet based. I can continue to train for the modality that I want to train for. If I look after my diet, I can get leaner, I can relax it, I can do whatever I want to do. But, you know, I always know compositionally I can change my composition by looking at my nutrition and potentially maybe adding some extra, almost like NEAT-based exercises. So you know, I have a Versa climber in my garage, and you know, I'm a massive fan of Versa climber, and you know, I'll jump on that and do half an hour a day of Versa climber at some point. And if I do that for 8 weeks, I'm going to be leaner. Because again, I'm regulating my caloric intake. One of the problems, again, we talked about group training. One of the problems you got is you're expending more energy. If you expend more energy, naturally your body says, I want more energy. Unfortunately, you're not going to impact that equilibrium, which means you get that churn because people don't move. So you need to advise or give them some assistance with how do you manage your nutrition better. You know, and if there's consistency there, people get results.
Let's talk Whoop. Let's talk your Whoop score. What does it normally hit? Recovery, sleep score, and then let's just go in depth on that.
Well, because it's very subjective, there's certain markers on there that I aim at. Obviously, there's inconsistency, discrepancies. One of the cool things about Whoop is that if I'm coming down with something, it spots it. You know, so I'm a big fan of getting on top of. You know, we've got 3 kids. We've got 1 in primary school, and again, you've got kids.
Yeah, 2. Yeah.
So right, you know what kid sickness is like, right? So if we find out there's one of the kids at school is really sick, I'm like, right, I've got to keep an eye on my scores here because that'll flag it hugely. I use it for my activity. I use it for my ice bath. I use it for my recovery stuff because it integrates with Hyperice. So I use all the Hyperice devices. They all Bluetooth to it, so I can monitor all of that. But typically my HRV, I'm always aiming at 100 plus on my HRV, which again will flux. Sometimes it's 120, 130. Other times it's sub 90. But I'm always aiming at in excess of 100, which collectively my HRV is to me is a reflection of how well everything's gone, rather than just how well one particular thing has gone. My activity, again, varies day to day, and often that will be based around what that score is. So a bit like what I said earlier about one of the first things I'd always ask my client is, how's your week been? If I've got a lot of stress on that week, I need to bring my training down a little bit, which was always what I used to do with my clients, and I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't do that myself. Because ultimately what I'm thinking of is I don't want to injure myself, or I don't want to put myself at a high risk of sickness, right? So I don't want to overreach, which is the term we use in, if we're dealing with athletes. So I don't want to overreach. So my HRV is always consistently over 100. I try and aim at that. My sleep score, I'd like to think is, 90 plus the majority of the time. There are times when it isn't, and that might be due to an external factor. It could be our 5-year-old coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning, deciding she's wanting to talk about her birthday party for the next 2 hours. It could be anything. So there's variables, and there's always things in there, but there's always targets I'm always aiming at that I will try and hit as much as I can. And this is always this ideal world scenario. And when we talk about, to give an example, dieting, if you're going to diet for a show, you're going to do bodybuilding, you're going to do whatever it might be. Tell you what, one of the easiest things is be single, have no dependence, have full control over your work. If you can do all that, it's really easy because you get to govern everything. When you start bringing independence, I don't get to govern if one of my kids is sick. Don't get to govern that. I can I can contribute to the fact they won't be, or their sickness is going to be minimal, but I can't. These are variables, right? And the thing is with parents always look at these variables and go, oh, I can't do it because of. No, you can. You just got to understand that when those variables come into play, there's certain things you've got to compromise. So for me, if the variable is the little one comes in and disrupts my sleep, I know the next day I'm just not going to have to train as hard. And I've got to accept that. Because if I do train hard and I don't recover properly, I'm going to get injured. And ultimately, the only person to blame at the end of that is me, because I've mismanaged my input versus output. And when people talk about calories in, calories out, it's the same thing. We're looking at output versus input. Professional athletes, if I'm dealing with professional athletes, if anyone's ever, and a lot of the coaches, when they do the group coaching stuff, they may never have worked with people at sort of an elite level. But one thing I always say to coach, go and find an Olympic lifting program and look at it. Because that, with a professional athlete, is that we're trying to control all the variables. So with a pro athlete, I would expect the athlete to control the variables. So if I tell them to go to bed at a certain time, they go. If they start to mess with those variables, they'll get injured. Especially if they don't tell me. If they tell me, it's okay, I can compromise something. But ultimately, when we create, for example, a quadricycle, I was fortunate enough to work with a couple of Olympic athletes. You design their program from the previous Olympics, and you go, right, what does this person need to get to if you're talking track and field is essentially easy, because track and field, you've got a definitive number that you expect that to win that race or that throw or whatever it might be the year after. So you're just aiming at that number. Whereas other things, you've got, team sports and blah, blah, blah. You've got variables, right, that you can't control. But what you can do is you can train up to a point, weightlifting, to set variable. We know that lifter is probably going to have to lift X amount more than the previous year's winner to win the competition. So you're aiming towards that. And the problem is all those little glitches in the road start to put you behind that plan. And this is the bit like life plan, right? Is that you might have the best laid out plans, but if you've got more variables, always extend that time period. If you're saying, if you're a single bloke, no dependence, no whatever it might be, I might say to you, it's going to take you 12 weeks to get in shape. If then you come to me and say, I've got kids, I've got a job that involves shift work, or I've got a job where sometimes I'm, called into work, or I'm on call, or whatever it might be, that's another variable. If nutritionally you have a lot of commitments outside of your own nutrition, you can't govern all your food. Maybe somebody feeds you once a week for whatever reason, and you can't really be too involved with that. If you've got social commitments, so again, I have clients where occasionally they'd have a drink or whatever it might be, that becomes a variable. So I've got to take all those variables on board. And then I might say to you, it's going to take you 18 weeks because of all the variables. If you've got tons of variables, it's going to take you 24 weeks. If realistically, you've got so many variables that you're not prepared to compromise on, I might say to you, it's never going to happen. And that's part of being honest with you.
What would you say to the gym owner who's watching this? How can they install what they've learned from you on this podcast into their clients' lives more? Is it a fact of holding a seminar on this? Is it just the conversations off the gym floor? Is it the stuff that they post on their community groups online?
It's a bit of everything, really. It's net effect, right? So it's a bit like what I was saying about the hydration thing. If I can hydrate anybody on this planet better than they hydrated yesterday, I've improved their performance. Science tells us this. Data tells us this. Consistently, we know this. People will actually feel hydration. They were like, oh my God, I feel so much better. My skin's better. They get the cosmetic benefits, but they also get I feel so much more energized. So we get all that. And they're quick wins. It's an easy win, for us. And from a supplemental perspective, if you were to say to me, which one is going to have the biggest impact for the simplest and easiest output, I might take hydrate. Hydrate yourself. If you do that, everything else is cool. Second thing, manage your caffeine better. You manage your caffeine. Caffeine's a phenomenal performance enhancer. You don't have to take it from what we've got. We've obviously designed it and put it into certain dosages, all based off science. But ultimately, if you just want to have a coffee, put the coffee at the right time. If you're going to have caffeine, have it in the first 6 to 8 hours of your day. Then you won't disrupt your sleep. If in the afternoon you're not prepared to take a nootropic or anything that's going to enhance anything, and you get people who don't want to take supplements. You've got other choices. You need to go outside, get some fresh air, get another hit of daylight. That's going to improve your cognitive output. You need to probably think about how you manage your devices. Light management towards the latter part of the day. You need to think about dimming lights. And again, one of the routines we never got into with us is that there's a certain cutoff point of blue light, and there's certain times I have to be on my laptop at 10 o'clock at night. If there is, I wear blue light glasses. Ideally, my laptop gets shut at 8. Ideally. But this is reality, right? Is odd times. I can't just turn. I run my own business, right? I don't get to turn it off at 8. If you work a 9 to 5, you should be turning it off at 8. And there's certain laws now starting to come in where they're like, right, there's, I think it might even be in Scandinavia, Australia, I think, just recently passed a law where you are not allowed to email your employees outside of work hours. And your employee legally doesn't have to respond, which I think is great in many respects. But again, this goes back to that Neolithic kind of 9-5 job. 9-5 just don't. And TikTok, when I spoke to TikTok, I said, have you got dream pods? They said, no, we haven't. There wasn't this weird response. When I asked at one of the banks, I said, have you got dream pods or anything like that? They said, what? They're completely innovative. They get it. Google have them. YouTube have them. They actively encourage their employees to take a rest in the afternoon. Because they know it increases productivity. But it's a risk, right? It's a risk. What if we start telling our employees that they need to manage their caffeine better? Is that going to bring down performance? The way they see it is yes, it will. But if I can explain to them the impact on sleep, they'll go, what? Hold on. This is actually useful. Because when we're still stuck in the dark ages, in many respects, is that, remember, I talked about cohorts before, is that generation, the Wolf of Wall Street generation, they were a cohort that did it the best they knew at the time, and they got it wrong. We will get it wrong. The next cohort, the next generation that come through will have learned from the things we did and we did badly, and they'll go, we're going to do it better. But then there's still going to be the people who go, that's how we used to do it, so we're going to continue to do it that way. And this is what happens with businesses. Businesses now fail because they don't move. Fitness marketing agency. Imagine if you continued to do the stuff you did 5 years ago. You got no chance. You got no chance. And the thing is, there will be marketing agencies out there who started in the 80s who now they're unable to keep up. Because there was a period of time where they were like, nah, our way works. Doesn't. Times move too fast.
Innovation's key.
Yeah, and it is. And because time, we evolve and we move. Evolve is the wrong word. Business evolves so rapidly that if you don't move with the times, you're going to. And this is the same with trainers. I've got trainers who started when I started who were like, they just moan about the industry and go, yeah, but it's all this and it's all that. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't move. So therefore, you're stuck where you are. You're still in this spit and sawdust gym, doing the same thing you always used to do because you are too stubborn to move. And this is, businesses, gyms. A lot of the gyms that are closed in, COVID. And everybody's like, oh, it was COVID that did it to us. No, you were already on your way down. COVID just put the nail in the coffin, and I remember there was I had a meeting with one of the big businesses in London. I talked to them about their acquisition of trainers, and I said, you've got this almost perfect world scenario right now, is that I can name off the top of my head 14 gyms off the top of my head that have closed within a probably 4-mile radius of you. And every single trainer, every single one of those gyms needs somewhere to work. And they've all come to you. So they were like, oh, we're getting trainers really easily. I said, yeah, but it's not going to keep going like that. Now you've got to keep hold of them. So it's the churn rate, right? Is that now what they realise is that, trainers are starting to leave now because something we're doing isn't the way they want it, or isn't right, or we haven't mastered that, and it's new business, so they won't. They need to learn and adapt and blah blah blah.
Let's switch to business. What are the 3 biggest mistakes that you've made?
Obviously, this is subjective, right? Because it depends on the type of business. But for me, was trying to do it all alone was probably the biggest one. So when I launched the academy, it was like this whole, I'd like to say it was a northern attribute, but I watched my parents graft. They worked hard for many years. Owning a pub was difficult, right? And it's a lot of hours. It was insane hours, like, and the afternoon nap was epitomised by my parents. But they didn't have an afternoon nap. They fell asleep. They didn't mean to. They just fell asleep in the afternoon because the only time they didn't have, so we get home from school, we'd eat early because they had to start work at 6, and they'd both doze off for half an hour. And it was like, that was the done thing because they worked such long hours. It was insane. But again, that developed a work ethic for me, which was good. And I learned a lot from my parents, with respect to business. But one of the things is that there was that stubborn thing of when I started the academy, I should have taken investment. But it was like, no, I'm going to fund it all myself. I'm going to do this, that, the other. And I think back then, it was a different world. Investment wasn't a thing. You went to banks. I remember my first big sort of pitch to a bank manager. I spent months and months putting this business plan together. He was going to lend me £100,000, which was a long time ago. And I was like, oh my God, and you had to put this massive business plan together. I mean, it was a massive, thick document. And it was all like, what do you forecast? What do you this, that, the other? And you had to actually go and give it to a person and talk them through it. And they agreed. So I was about to open a facility in Leeds, actually. So I had the premises all set up. I had Life Fitness running kit out for me, and I had good relations. But I think it was not taking investment. And apart from the bank manager discussion, after that, when I started the academy, it was like, I've got to do it on my own. I've got to self-fund it. So fortunately, we made a lot of money, but it was, and continued to do so. But it was this thing of put money back in. But had we taken investment, I would have got team members, so more people who could have helped me with the business. So it's a bit like the Dragon's Den scenario. And I'd have also had more capital to grow the business faster.
We see this with the gyms. Sometimes they stair-step the growth of their gym. So they'll buy some equipment from that manufacturer, then from that manufacturer, and they piece this jigsaw together of their perfect gym. And like 5, 8, 10 years down the line, they finally get to the perfect gym that they've always wanted. But they could have just gone there like day one if they'd had the right conversations and opened up a few doors and acquired the finances to build what they wanted.
Absolutely. But I think there's also a very big lesson here, is that you've got to be very careful about, because again, we were just talking before about the 14 gyms that I named that closed. One of the big things that happens with trainers, particularly in London, is you get a good trainer. Good trainer inevitably has good clients. Clients are interested in, and I always say this is a bit like bars and restaurants, right? Everybody wants a bar and a restaurant. They don't want to run it. They want a bar and a restaurant because it's a bit of a flex, right? If you've got a lot of money, it's a bit of a flex to have your own bar or restaurant, but it's also a bit of a flex to have your own gym. So what you get is you get these really wealthy clients, and I've had this offered to me.
I've seen it happen
countless times. So the client gives you a ton of money and goes open a gym. So you find this facility, premium location, premium real estate, and then because you got all this money, you go and buy all this premium kit. So a Laco kit, like everybody buys Laco bars. Laco barbells are incredible, but it's not the sort of thing you invest in a startup. They're incredibly expensive. There's a reason they're incredibly expensive, but again, people buy all this super exclusive, super expensive kit because they want to make the place look the nuts. They get all the wall panels, they make the place look beautiful. But ultimately then they forget they've got to have clients and then they've got no money left. So at that point, they're like, right, it's this field of dreams scenario.
Or the investor's giving bad business advice because they've never been a business owner.
No, they've never owned a gym or whatever it might be, and you don't know where they made their money. If it was in real estate, they don't care because now they've got a bit of real estate or whatever. So the investment thing is you've got to be really intelligent with it. And it's a bit like taking loans. I've got a friend who built a multiple £1 million business off PayPal capital. Because he was running several businesses at the time, but he wanted to open this other business to actually showcase one of their other businesses and what the other business can do. And it ended up scaling massively, but he paid for the entire business through PayPal capital, because they were willing to lend him some money at quite a low interest rate. So there's opportunities there. But I grew up in this thing of don't have credit cards, don't accrue personal debt. And I think a lot of that was real and it was realistic, and I think there's too many people go into it, and maybe that advice I've just given about, taking investment. But that was the biggest regret I had with the academy now, knowing what I know now, was not getting a team of people who could help me, who could assist me, my dragons, and could also contribute financially. Because remember, we were largely an online business. Our expenditure, we didn't have physical premises, we didn't have any of that, and we didn't need any of that. But at times I thought, we should open an academy gym. But then probably would have been the biggest regret I ever had. So that was probably one. Staffing, thinking I could do it all myself. Probably my other one, which again is partly kind of the investment thing as well, is that I didn't take on staff early enough because it was like, nobody's going to do this as well as me. And I think you've got to bite the bullet as a business owner and realise that if you can get 70% of what you would deliver out of an employee, you're doing really well. You're never going to find you mirrored. It's never going to happen, but it's finding a good person. And sometimes that good person also adds to it because they bring another dimension that you've never had. They bring a different perspective. They bring something new. So employing people, they're probably the two key lessons and key things I would have done differently. Outside of that, it's looking after consumers, something we've always done pretty well, I think. But again, we could have done better. Is looking after who you get. Again, you'll probably run the stats quite regularly on marketing as what it costs to get a new customer versus keep an old one. We all know the stats, but yet people still sort of shirk them. And I think particularly in the online world, again, you must deal with a lot of online coaches. Problem is in the online world, they're quite happy with churn. It's weird. It's like, I'm okay because I can pick other clients up. And especially when people are almost mugging people off with a service. And you get this a lot. And this is one of my biggest sort of hates about the online world, is that you can actually deliver a really bad service and nobody ever finds out about it because you just move on to the next consumers.
Churn on to the next one.
Yeah, as long as your marketing's good. You just keep picking up new clients, you give them a bad service, they churn, you pick up a new one, you churn. And the problem is, because you're now dealing with a global audience, you never really get found out. And that's what worries me about it. But the problem you have there is that you're damaging the industry, because all these people that have had this bad experience, they're never ever going to go back to online coaching because they've had this really bad experience. And I always say with personal training, it was always that thing of pretty much all of my clients had a personal trainer beforehand and their experience was terrible.
And then you come in
and the experience is completely different, right?
What do you think the future of the fitness industry is 20 years from now?
Always a tricky question, but I think everything's circular, right? And I think there's various things at the fitness industry that it's incredible right now. Marketing being one of them. Marketing, business, business acumen. I think it's a big thing now. But the problem, what we've done is we've now gone from this where 15 years ago, coaches were all about upskilling. They're like, I need to learn how to coach better. I need to be better at, I need to understand hypertrophy. I need to understand strength. I need to understand compositional stuff. I need to understand, there was a day where we would do a fat loss seminar and, we'd sell 300 tickets in a weekend. Whereas now, people don't want to do a fat loss seminar. They want to do a seminar on how to sell more places. The problem is that they get to that point where they're great at selling more places. They're just terrible at delivering the service at the end of it.
And they get found out.
And especially if it's a one-to-one business, and especially if you're geographically constrained. So if you're a business in a local area, you mess up, you're done. You need to move. You can't keep doing that. And you get found out, and it very quickly escalates as to people knowing, because it's a small industry and it's a small profession. If there's a gym around here that's doing really badly, most people know about it. So it is about getting it right the first time. to some degree, or not necessarily getting it right the first time, but if you get it wrong, you need to put your hand up and go, I got it wrong. And this is what I'm doing to fix it. And I think this is what all big businesses do very well, is that when they get something wrong, they put their hand up, they go, hey, look, I'm sorry. Bad businesses go, we got it wrong, whatever. Put your hand up and go, look, we didn't do this well.
And well-being inside of the fitness industry, like the independent sector, what do you see independent gyms, how can they incorporate well-being further into their offering of what they do?
Firstly, understand what well-being is. Because remember, well-being, you have so many different interpretations. What's well-being? Well-being is very specific to the individual. It's like fitness. It's like, it's like somebody comes to me and says, I want to be fitter. For what? For what? As long as you can tell me for what, we can sort it out. So but it has to be very specific. And this is a bit like well-being and wellness. And it's different at different stages of life. Wellness is different for a parent. Well-being is different for a parent. Very different for somebody who's in the 60s. Very different for different age demographics, all these different things. So it's understanding what well-being actually is for people. But it's also understanding that well-being goes well beyond the gym. And the gym was always, that was always my bread and butter. And that was like, go to the gym, train, exercise. Critically important. But people now look at exercise more as movement. You need to move every day. You need to do something. Step counts, blah, 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 all the basics. And if you can nail all that, but then you can look at people's lifestyles. Because this is what we're looking at. We're looking at people's lifestyles. And like I said to you, we always use this stat, is that statistically, people spend 0.4% of their lives in formal exercise. So either going to a gym or they're training or they're going out on a bike or whatever. 0.4%. Okay, it's insane. Now, if you add in all the almost non-formal, that pushes that up to about 4%. Right? So 4% of your life you're going to be doing some kind of activity. 96% of the time you're sleeping, you're working, and you've got very little in the way of recreational time. Roughly say about 6% of your life is your recreation. So you want that 6% to be amazing, right? So you want to earn good money because that facilitates that 6% being amazing. You want to have good relationships because that facilitates that 6%. You want to be well slept, otherwise that 6% is going to be spent sleeping. What do you do on your day off? Do something amazing. Or I sleep, I play catch up on my sleep because my sleep's terrible. What do you want to be doing? You have a day off and then you're shattered. It's like when people go out, we always this debate about holidays. The problem is with holidays, people go on holiday and they disrupt their entire biological rhythm. So what do? You go out, you sleep in, you stay out later, you drink every night.
All inclusive.
Yeah. You eat things you wouldn't normally eat, you don't exercise, and you come back and you feel terrible. And it takes you a week to recover from your holiday. It doesn't make sense, right? Whereas now people go, my holiday is about wellness. People go to... and retreats and things like this will become a big thing. I did the high net worth event and I said, look, one of the biggest almost financial opportunities you've got is to create a wellness space for all of your clients. Is that, retreats. I've already got one of the guys came back to me. We only did this 4 weeks ago. He's booked a massive villa in Spain. I think it holds 18 couples. They have a gym on site. They've got a pool. They've got a plunge pool. It's basically rigged up for wellness. So they've booked it, and now he's doing a big wellness retreat there. And I said the thing is, you could make half a year's salary in a weekend putting on a wellness retreat if you do it well. And if you do it really well, you can do it again and again and again and again because people love it. Wellness retreats are a big thing because people want to. And we talked briefly about autonomic nervous systems. Is that people who jack themselves up on stimulants every day are just in a sympathetic state all the time. You look at people you look at drug addicts. Drug addicts have spent most of their life in a sympathetic state, so they're absolutely fried. So now what they're doing is part of the recovery is spending the rest of their lives in a parasympathetic state. So meditation, breath work, all the stuff that calms them down, they're putting themselves in that state now. And when we look at business people, it's the same thing. They're 100 million miles an hour, but when they stop, they get sick. Or they sleep, or they're trying to catch up on recovery, which they can never do. So really, we've got to every day, you've got to look at your clients, and gym owners have got to look at this, is that every single client that comes through your door, you've got to understand what their output is, and you've got to improve their input. So can we improve their nutrition? Can we improve their recovery? I had a conversation with the head of EMEA for High Price yesterday. We met for lunch, and their whole world is completely different now, is that everybody's looking at recovery and restoration. They're like, look, people want to go to the gym and push themselves harder than ever before. And I always say it's going back 100 years. If you go back 100 years, people always say to me, people will come to me about the supplements and go, but you don't need supplements. I said, right, work this one out. I said, cognitively, you think, if I take you back 100 years, cognitively, how much information did you need to process on a day-to-day basis? Just take your phone. Every time you open your phone, that's information your brain has to process and turn into something, right? Be that learning, be it mindless, but whatever. Your demands on your brain are huge. You then look at work. Is work more demanding now than it ever was? Yep. Are the expectancies of work higher than they ever were? Yep. Is your physical output higher than it was 100 years ago? 100 years ago, were you going to the gym 5 times a week? You know, was CrossFit a thing? Was High Rocks a thing? You know, people are pushing themselves physically harder than ever before because people have different markers they've got to live up to. You know, professional athletes, the numbers they have to chase now are significantly higher than they were 100 years ago. So they've got to train much harder, but they've also got to recover much harder. So all these recovery modalities are becoming a big thing. So recovery suites in gyms, massive, huge. But again, it's this, you've got to adapt to the times. You've got to understand that's a large part of it. Ice baths in gyms. So many gyms now.
Also easier to buy.
Yeah, they're accessible.
You know, for the consumer. So the thought of doing a training program 4 days a week in a gym and sweating and having DOMs and navigating an injury is tough. But going to a sauna and ice bath is an easy purchase. It's like going to the chiropractor, right?
Yeah.
You know, getting a click, you feel like...
And the hardest part is just doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
biggest bang for a buck I get in a day is 3 minutes I spend in an ice bath. That's my biggest bang for my buck. 3 minutes, I've got to be in there. I've got to be uncomfortable for 3 minutes. Of course I'm going to do it. It's a no-brainer. You know, it's no different than going to a HIIT class. You know, I'm like, I can go in there for 3 minutes a day, just literally sit there, and I'm getting physiological benefits that will serve me well throughout the course of my day. And I've also started my day with something challenging. You know, there's all of these different... And people have got to grasp that people are looking for these modalities. They're looking for this wellness piece. They're looking for stuff they can do easily, that are challenging, that are difficult. But remember, people are time poor. They want... It's like... People, what was it, the 6-minute abs. So somebody created the 5-minute abs. Somebody created the 4-minute. People are time conscious. They want to do things quick. You know, workouts that are 20 minutes long. Group coaching. It's like group coaching. It was, how do you get in and get out as quickly as possible? You know, people in the city want workouts that are 40 minutes long because they've got an hour for their lunch. So they need 10 minutes to get showered, changed, and then grab some food on the way back to the office. You can't do hour-long classes. You know, it took them ages to work this out in central London. Everybody's doing hour-long classes and wondering why no one's turning up. Mm-hmm. I'm like, because they haven't got time to shower, change, and get back to where they were. I went to a big facility in Ireland, walked in. They were on an industrial estate. And the guy goes, let me show you the new equipment. I said, no, show me your changing rooms. So it was on an industrial estate, middle of nowhere. But 20,000 people, I think, worked on this industrial estate. So you've got 20,000 people as a catchment, and there's nowhere else for them to go to train apart from your facility. Facility was decent size. But I went in the changing rooms. I said, you've got 2 showers in each changing room. I said, and these people want to work out and go back to work. I said, and you've just spent, I think you'd spent £14,000 on a new leg press. I said, no. I said, you need to sort your changing rooms out. There's no hairdryers, there's no mirrors, there's no ventilation, there's no... I said, so every single person that doesn't come to this gym doesn't come to the gym for a reason, right? You've got the people who just don't want to come to the gym. You've got people who don't come because they don't like the staff or whatever it might be. But then you've got a huge chunk that just don't go because they can't go back to work.
It's not convenient for them.
It's not convenient. So you've got to make it convenient. You've got to look at really what the... And he was like, oh. He goes, I never thought of it like that. He goes, look, it's obvious. It's obvious to me. I've walked in as someone who looks at businesses and interprets businesses and goes, you're delivering a service that's phenomenal on the gym floor. I said, but nobody wants to come. How
can I find out more about everything that we've discussed, about you as an individual, about the different companies that you run?
So I'm still active, not as active as I was on social media because, again, a lot of my time is spent with Human 24 and doing a lot of stuff with them. And my life is one long meeting now. But it's, you know, and talking to investors and blah, 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 but, or presenting. You know, I spend a lot of time presenting now. So the Academy, advancedcoachingacademy.com. My social handle, my main one is Instagram, so at the PT Coach. That may no longer be at the PT Coach, you know, in the next year or so, because again, it isn't really my identity anymore. I don't do that much work in the fitness industry like I used to. I'd like to still think I'm relevant. You know, I was in it a long time, and you know, we've had 6,500 coaches through the Academy. So there's a lot of people have benefited from what we do. We still have the academy. So we've got the nutrition and the coaching academy still active. The business one is going through a reiteration. That'll be live again soon, which again is all online stuff. We're doing the live events, so again we'll be announcing some new ones soon. We'll be doing the private client event again, which I think will be a big one for us going forward. Small group, because it's a high ticket event, but again this is about people being able to charge a lot more money. So the outcome of it is they end up working with higher level clientele and know how to service them, and the potential for secondary revenue streams are massive. Retreats and all of the things we've sort of talked about. So we've got that side, and then Human 24 is, I'm the co-founder of Human 24. I'm responsible for nearly all of their education. We're doing a lot of work in the industry with, not in the industry, but in various industries. As I said, we're doing some work with the F1, where we work with the military quite a bit. We're doing a lot of corporate stuff. We do a lot of stuff in the corporate space. But again, these are people who all look after themselves. The sort of people that are buying supplements are the sort of people that still look after themselves across the board. So our consumer is still the sort of consumer that buys an ice bath. He's still the sort of consumer that does breath work. He's still the sort of consumer that works out daily. He's still the sort of consumer that's concerned about well-being, and also are aware of things like circadian rhythm and chronobiology and sleep and blah, blah, blah. So for us, the biggest challenge for us is explaining to people what the supplements are designed for. Because again, we're in a brand new space, where I guess the first to market that collectively put these together. There's plenty of people who do sleep supplements, but they do sleep supplements. The problem is, if you realise there's a sleep problem that you're fixing, you've got to understand there's a wake problem we also need to fix, which is what we've done. We've looked at the sleep problem, but also realised there's a wake problem. It's a bit like saying, that if somebody's getting injuries chronically, there's a recovery problem. So fix your recovery. So Human 24, which is just www.human24.com, and social handle is human24_ on Instagram. We're also on TikTok and Twitter and blah, blah, blah.
It's been an awesome conversation, Phil.
Thank you so much.
It's blown my mind. I'm going to implement many things that you've talked about, and I'm sure everyone watching or listening is exactly the same.
Sure.
I appreciate you coming on the FMA podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Marketing Agency podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe so you can catch future episodes.